How are we doing, everybody? We made it, survived that last week. I battled a sickness. Mick, made it through the Pacific Northwest unscathed, and we're back for another episode of Six Rotations. He's Mick Haley. I'm Daniel Gilman. And listen, once again, we just love the support. Really encouraged. Anytime someone wins one of our contests, go ahead and tweet the picture of your jacket at us. That was really fun when John won and wore it to the Creighton Marquette match on Sunday, which of course will be one of the many matches that we will cover. It was a terrific week again in college volleyball. We had some big upsets. Kansas went down to an unranked foe, and Arizona State. Yeah, Mick, one of our darlings finally got exposed a bit. But as always, we're brought to you by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. If you want to sponsor your business or anyone that you know does as well, go ahead and reach out to us, sixrotations@gmail.com. Spell that out. That's also how you can win our contests, where we give away some cool jackets or hoodies, depending on what you call it. And we will be having another one today. Make sure to stay tuned to find out how. But Mick, where once again we could start in so many different areas. I kind of want to hover around this idea that now that we get into the last 3 weeks of the regular season, we're going to start seeing teams get exposed a little bit more. I think the weight of the season and the stamina and the injuries and everything starts piling up, and Arizona goes and shuts out Kansas in a dominant effort. And after Arizona State took down Kansas as well. And, I wonder how many more we'll see. Mississippi State took a set against Texas, but Texas was able to come back and win that one. Where do you feel, at least when you were a coach, when it comes to mid-November, what's the mindset?
Oh, this is the dog days. This finishing, wanting to get into the tournament. This is the maybe the second hardest time, besides the middle of October when they're having their tests. Midterm tests really bog them down quite a bit, especially if they're traveling. But one of the things to look at is first round hosting, and there is a battle at maybe 10 teams trying to get the last two or three spots of that 16 top 16 hosting. And I don't know what to do. I just roll the dice with those guys because one week they're up, the next week they're down. You just don't know. You mentioned Mississippi State taking a game from Texas, but they also took the match from A&M the week before. So it's amazing what teams do in a 2 week span, and then they seem to disappear. I like the poll pretty much. I think maybe Wisconsin should be higher. I think they've gotten through some of their problems, but they when they win pretty handily, 3-0 every time.
So
So
let's go ahead and look at the top 10 now, where Pittsburgh and Nebraska continue their reign. Nebraska went out to the Pacific Northwest and set all kinds of records. At Oregon, first breaking their attendance record of over 8,500. And then Washington had almost 10,000 in that massive match. But again, Landfair, Murray, Jackson, it's starting to look like Nebraska might be their best team since we started doing this video podcast. But Nebraska is still number two because Pittsburgh sweeps North Carolina. The team hits over 400. Both teams are going to have tests. Let's continue we'll talk more about Wisconsin, Penn State, different teams like that. But we're going to have another weekend filled with tests. Minnesota, Nebraska on Thursday. And then Pitt will have to take on Florida State and Miami this weekend. Do you think either of those two top teams will have any trouble?
well, at this time of the year, anytime they have to go on the road, they're probably going to have a little trouble. I think they'll win. I think they're both driven, and that's why. It's not like they're just ranked high. They're driven. They want to both be one. They both want to win. They both are coming back. One from getting trounced, and the other one from being there three times and not winning. And they both. I mean, it's really going to be interesting, but you have to be on the lookout for an upset in the tournament. I think they go through the season relatively pretty easily here, but boy, when you get in the tournament, you better watch out because you've been coasting a bit.
So Nebraska and Pitt both will be at home for these matches this weekend. Nebraska also has a big one coming up November 23rd, the weekend before Thanksgiving, at home against Wisconsin. Their last road test will come Black Friday at Penn State. So that's the Huskers lineup for you there. Meanwhile, Pittsburgh will host Florida State Friday, Miami on Sunday, and then they finish their year at Louisville the day before Thanksgiving and at home against Georgia Tech the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So a quick rundown there. But as we kind of wrinkle out the rest of this, let's talk about it because Wisconsin, Mick, they love to play on NBC. They blow out Purdue on the road on NBC. And then again, it's like we need these five setters to be the ones that are NBC games because that's going to encourage a little bit more of the viewership. Did you watch any of it? The first set between Wisconsin and Penn State was very tight, 25-23. And then, oh my goodness, 25-12, 25-13. The Badgers, I agree, should be in the top five.
Yeah, the bottom fell out for Penn State, and you think, well, that's okay. And then you look, Penn State was 13-0 in the conference and only lost one match this whole season. And that was two games in a row, two sets in a row that really they couldn't get anything going. And Wisconsin got it rolling. And we haven't seen Wisconsin roll all year. That's the first time. So they've got to have hope now. And I think they'll move up quite quickly.
And the difference in total points adjusted between Penn State at 4 and Wisconsin at 6 is less than 30 total points. Creighton is right there. You know what? I think that first set loss against Marquette might have scared a couple voters from putting Creighton into that top 4. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you a spoiler. For our media poll, Creighton did jump over Penn State into the number 4 spot. I put them there as well. I think Wisconsin number 5, Creighton at 4. They've earned it for now, but Wisconsin can play their way up into that top 4 seed. Of course, if they can do a better showing against Nebraska. Meanwhile, Wisconsin has a fun weekend because it's always weird when you have to go out and play the LA teams, right, Mick? At
It does.
USC Thursday, 11 p.m. Eastern on Big Ten Network. That's a doubleheader Thursday with Minnesota, Nebraska, and then Wisconsin, USC. I just don't see the Badgers struggling. They are looking like a well-oiled machine, and I cannot wait for that matchup in 2 weekends when it's Nebraska against Wisconsin.
You know, it's interesting you talk about Wisconsin and Creighton because it's Schreck and Franklin versus Sisk and Martin. And those in this match against Marquette, they had 135 swings, 82 of them, Creighton I'm talking about, 82 of them are by Martin and Sisk with 39 kills between the two of them. And when you look at Wisconsin stats, you're going to see the same thing. You're going to see Schreck and you're going to see Franklin, and they're going to take a majority of the swings. So it seems to me like it's too bad we can't get that one scheduled because that will be a great one, especially if they meet in the tournament.
Yeah, I agree. I would really enjoy that. Remember, Creighton lost in 5 against Nebraska. They lost in 5 at Louisville, and that one was at Nebraska as well in Lincoln. And then they beat Purdue and Kansas. For all of those clamoring, well, Creighton has an easy schedule. Remember, they scheduled 4 of the top 12 teams before the season, all of them on the road. They won at Kansas, and then they beat Purdue at Kansas as well. And then they go and they win handedly in Milwaukee this past weekend with a 4-set comeback win. They finished their year with a bunch of cellar dwellers in Seton Hall and Georgetown, DePaul and Xavier. So like I said, I feel like Creighton has earned that spot. The question is, will Wisconsin work their way in? Can Penn State also work their way in with an upset over Nebraska? Meanwhile, Mick, going around the country and the rest of this top 10, there's really not a ton to touch on. Stanford took care of business with a 3-set win over Georgia Tech. But for the first time in program history, Arizona State is going to work their way into the top 10. Maybe first time since 2015, I think I saw that. SMU rounds out our top 10, but Arizona State is looking like a wagon in the Big 12 right now. They had that terrific year last year, finished off their Pac-12, and then now with that win over Kansas, it is a driver's seat spot for ASU.
Yeah, and then Kansas doesn't get any fresh air because this week they're playing two more top opponents who want to move up and get first or second in that Big 12 conference. So these 2 weeks are going to define Kansas. Either they're going to recover or they're going to go down the tube. One of the two here.
Well, the question is, how far did Kansas fall? Let's go ahead and look at the rest of the top 25 from 8 to 12 after the losses to the two teams from Arizona. Meanwhile, Oregon jumped over them with their three-set victory of Minnesota, which pushes the Gophers down from 14 to 16. Georgia Tech actually went up a spot despite getting swept by Stanford. And as you mentioned it, Baylor and TCU will get their licks against Kansas starting Wednesday for the Horned Frogs at 7:30 Eastern, Saturday for Baylor at 3 o'clock on ESPN Plus. Now, Mick, this is going to bring in what our giveaway will be this week for those that are clamoring. We've had a couple really close. I know we hear you guys in the comments. We see the emails. You got to win. It's just that simple. We had one winner for this past weekend. The question was how many total sets would be in Kansas, Arizona State, which was 4, Penn State, Wisconsin, which was 3, and BYU, Utah. Utah jumps over BYU with a 3-set win in the Holy War. Did you see that football game too? That was a crazy one. BYU was able to sneak away with a wild referee-aided victory there. But Joanna, congratulations. She picked it right on the nose. We had a lot of guesses of 12 or 13 sets, but Joanna won it with 10. We're going to shake it up this week. I can count, and I think I might be off, there are at least 9 matches between a ranked team and someone else this weekend that is in the top 30 to 40, where I feel like there is an upset brewing with TCU, Kansas, or Virginia, Stanford, or Baylor, Kansas, maybe FSU, SMU. So the question is, and email us, six6rotations@gmail.com. How many total upsets involving a ranked team? Unranked versus unranked do not count. How many upsets will there be this upcoming week starting on Wednesday with TCU Kansas? Go ahead and email us with that number. Maybe there will be 0. Maybe every better ranked team will win, or maybe we will have a week of chaos. So there's our sweepstakes for this one. Meanwhile, Mick, we have awesome more record breaking, and I wanted you to kind of touch on this because I broke down Oregon and Washington became the 37th and 38th D1 teams this year to break an attendance record. And obviously Nebraska is going to bring that in. But what about the BYU Utah matchup that had almost 6,000 fans to break the record crowd for Utah as they jump into the 20 spot, and Missouri is now ranked for the first time this year?
Yeah, one interesting thing I'd point out too that with the 2 wins by Oregon and Washington, guess who they beat? Minnesota.
Yeah, that's the
So
one.
Minnesota's in free fall right now. Pretty interesting that they're setting attendance records while they're doing this, especially since Keegan Cook, the coach at Minnesota, left Washington to go to Minnesota, and Tui comes in with her team at Washington and just annihilates them. And so now we've got a lot of good things going on, and you've got the battles in the Big 12. I mean, TCU is behind Baylor, but they have a win over TCU, at least I think 1, maybe 2 this year. That's a battle just of the North Texas schools. You've got all of these people, this whole group of people from, well, and why no love for Missouri? I think Missouri should be way up, much farther. They're just barely on the chart this time. They're second in the SEC right now,
Oh,
challenging for first. Texas is third, and Kentucky is snuck into the lead. Well, now Florida's pretty healthy right now. And I don't know if they're going to make a late run or not, but they can't wait much longer. They need to start beating people left and right, and they need to get some scheduled matches with teams that will move them up if they're going to win.
we're talking about for Florida to get into the top 16 because they probably feel pretty comfortable just working their way into the tournament. But you talk about Missouri, Mick, they've now won 9 in a row. They are 9-0 at home. You know, their wins are not necessarily eye-popping, except for, of course, the 5-set victory at Texas. But how about this upcoming Friday? Missouri against Florida, 7 o'clock on Friday. One more of the really fun matchups where we also have Florida State, Pittsburgh, and Miami, SMU. So it's going to be an action-packed Friday. You know, you talk about the SEC. Let's kind of bring in the ACC as well. I'm starting to feel like the ACC is stretching into a conference that could have 4 teams in the final 8 in the Elite 8. But the Big Ten is also looking strong. Illinois upset USC this past week. The committee this year, Mick, is going to have a headache. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult. And for the fans out there, you need to not only see the AVCA Terraflex Division One poll, but you need to look at the RPI because the committee in the NC2A has been known to lean on the RPI an awful lot instead of on the coaches poll. And I think this year the coaches poll has been pretty darn good about picking out the top teams. However, they're going to have their hands full from 10 to 25 or down. And I don't know how they're going to pick these sites for hosting because if you're trying to win the championship, you do not want to travel except for the final weekend if you have to do that. And if you're Louisville, you don't want to travel at all. You want to be home the whole time. So it's a real thing. And you talked about Florida. They could not host in the first round for as long as I can remember. If Missouri beats them this weekend, they have a chance of not hosting in the first and second rounds. And that's something the only facility has caused them trouble with before.
Yeah, Mick, you mentioned that, and it's funny because the Gators had to move from the O'Connell Center to play in their practice gym when I was a student and I was doing the radio broadcast, and you mentioned you might have been there.
I was there, and that was awful. We thought we should be given the hosting opportunity, yet they gave it to Florida in the small gym, which is not very becoming and not very well lit. We thought we were playing night baseball, so
Yeah.
it was pretty interesting.
I remember the match I did. Florida State upset Florida in the second round. I want to say it was 2016. Um, but I might be a little off with that. Meanwhile, I popped it up for a second there. Let's talk more about the media poll, Mick, because I think this is something too, because we only rank 16 teams amongst the 12 voters, 9 first place votes for Pittsburgh. Creighton, as I mentioned earlier, jumps over Penn State, but it's really interesting to look down in that 14 through 20 range with Minnesota, Georgia Tech clinging on barely. Dayton is in the spot as well. But I think, like you said, Missouri and maybe one of these 3 Big 12 teams will get a spot in hosting. I do feel like a team like Georgia Tech is going to fall out.
Yeah, I think Georgia Tech's in trouble. I think Minnesota for sure is in trouble. I think Florida's struggling and needs to get up there. I think Southern Cal is in trouble. They're too far down. BYU's loss to Utah is this late in the season is not a good look. I think there's going to be some teams hosting that I can't put my finger on right now. But Dayton's one that's only lost one match this season, and they continue to beat people 3-0.
Yeah, I'd love to see if they can redo that match against Ohio State that, was tied 1-1.
Yeah.
That would be a really telling because of how much Ohio State has struggled this year. That would be extremely telling. But no, they're doing a weird situation in the A10 though, Mick. They're doing what we did in the COVID years where they're doubling up the same every weekend. They're playing the same team back to back, which really is an anomaly. And Dayton, more than that, Mick, they've lost one match, and that's against Marquette in Bowling Green, Kentucky. They have not gone 5 since opening day against UNI. Their only 5-set match of the season. So that is something I'll keep an eye on for the tournament. And those of you that fill out a bracket, Dayton may be a popular pick to get upset early because of the fact that they haven't really been tested.
Or maybe a popular pick to upset somebody early.
Certainly a possibility. I want to talk about one more thing, a fun story. St. Thomas, which was a team that was in Division 3 a couple of years ago, jumped up to Division 1 because of the finances. They're in Minnesota. They had a huge upset win this past week, ending South Dakota State's long unbeaten streak. And so the Tommies of St. Thomas, yeah, the Tommies of St. Thomas. They got their first big Division One win. I like to give a little bit of love. If you guys have any fun stories throughout the year or anything like that, go ahead and email or tweet it at us at Six Rotations. But Mick, as we move into this upcoming week, I want to highlight again the biggest matches because it starts Wednesday with TCU Kansas. Thursday, you've got Minnesota, Nebraska, Wisconsin, USC. I've got my eye on Virginia, Stanford. I think Virginia is a team that can go out to Maples and really make some noise late on Thursday.
I really haven't seen Virginia this year, but I know Stanford's a two-horse show there. Their two big hitters have to score on the left side for them to win. They had a real big attendance match up there that got everything going, but characteristically, the people don't show up in large numbers at Stanford, so it'll be very interesting. That would be a place Virginia could get a toehold and upset somebody real quick.
Well, the Who's are having their best season in maybe ever right now. And what they did, Mick, and we're going to continue this Gator-centric episode, is they brought the assistant coach from that Florida team in Shannon Wells, and she's reinvigorated the Cavaliers program. As of right now, they're sitting at 9-5 in the conference. In terms of RPI, let's see. See, Virginia's at 44, so they feel pretty comfortable, but they don't have a top 25 win. And so when it comes down to it, there are a couple teams in the ACC that are sitting in the 40s, like NC State, for example, that also doesn't have a top 25 win. And, Miami has those big wins, so that has them just above. But that's an example. Miami has two massive wins, and their RPI is in the late 30s, and yet Virginia's at 44. They just have not been able to pick up a key victory. So that's one that I want to keep an eye on. Talk about Florida, Missouri as well. But you talked about SMU. SMU has to do the same thing that Pittsburgh does in that Miami, Florida State swing. Do you think they can get out of that unscathed?
Well, that's going to be tough. I mean, you look at SMU, they've got Florida State, then they've got Miami. Those two on any given weekend, back to back, can be murder. I mean, if they get hot, and it's all about rhythm for Miami. If Miami gets in a rhythm, they go. I don't know what propels Florida State. Some weekends they're really on it. Some weekends they're not. They're a pretty big team. They play pretty safe. Not real fast, but some pretty good tempo. But sometimes they just don't get over the hump, and I'm not sure where they are. But SMU's got their work cut out for them. There's no question.
Or remember, how many total upsets will there be? Email us at sixrotations@gmail.com. The MVP of the week may be Jordan Wilson, who had those 37 kills for Arizona. I didn't want the episode to end before mentioning that. Kansas goes down twice. Maybe they will have some vengeance this week with TCU and Baylor, or maybe the free fall will continue for the Jayhawks. I know I'm excited to find out. We'll talk to you guys again next week. Same place, same time. He's Mick. I'm Daniel, and this is Six Rotations.